On the afternoon of the 27th of February 2019, the air along the Kashmir border was sharp with cold and thicker with tension than any pilot could remember. For 3-5-year-old Abhinandan Varthaman, this was still just another routine combat sortie, the kind he had flown dozens of times before. He walked across the tarmac toward his waiting jet, boots crunching on loose gravel. A routine check, a routine intercept patrol. Nothing out of the ordinary, not on the surface. Just one day earlier, the Indian Air Force had launched airstrikes across the border, targeting what it called a terrorist training camp inside Pakistani territory. Both sides had moved fighters to the border overnight. Every pilot on alert knew Pakistani jets were in the air, circling, waiting for a chance to strike back. Varthaman had done this work long enough to taste the change in the air. He checked his harness, he checked his instruments, he ran through the pre-flight checklist step by step, the same way he always did. No extra hurry, no extra hesitation. He climbed into the cockpit of his MiG, 2-1 Bison, and pulled the canopy shut. He had no idea this routine flight would make him a household name across every continent on the globe. Varthaman taxied onto the runway, lifted off, and climbed to his assigned patrol altitude. He circled his sector, scanning the sky and watching his instruments. Ground control kept up a steady stream of routine updates over the radio. Nothing moving, nothing unusual. Keep your position. The tension was still there, hanging in every quiet transmission, but Varthaman held his course, steady as he had been trained. Then the static cut out. Ground control's voice sharpened. New contact. He leaned forward, eyes fixed on his radar display. The first blip popped up, faint. Just over the line of control, the heavily militarized dividing line through the heart of disputed Kashmir. Varthaman marked it, began to track its course. Then another blip appeared, then another. 3 contacts. 4. A full enemy formation had crossed the border. They were not turning back. They were pushing into Indian airspace. Ground control ran a quick check of every pilot in range. One by one, they marked distances. Varthaman's name came back first. He was the closest. He was the only one in position to cut the formation off before they could reach their target. No time to wait for backup. No time to coordinate. Varthaman's hand closed around the throttle. He pushed it forward all the way to the stop. The MiG's engine roared. The nose lifted. He climbed hard toward the enemy formation, closing the distance every second. Varthaman knew the jet he was flying better than he knew the back of his own hand. He knew every rattle, every quirk, every flaw that had earned it a grim nickname among every Indian pilot who had ever climbed into its cockpit. They called it the Flying Coffin. The MiG, 2-1 Bison, was no modern fighter. It was a relic of the Cold War, first rolled out for Soviet service back in 1959. By 2019, every major air force in the world had retired the design decades earlier. It lacked the stealth coating that hid modern jets from radar. It lacked the advanced fire control systems that let fourth-generation fighters lock on to targets from dozens of miles away. It was slower than every frontline Pakistani jet in the sky that day. It was clumsier in a turn. Its older engines were prone to sudden, catastrophic mechanical failure that could tear the jet apart in midair. Varthaman had flown this jet for 6 years. He had survived 3 in-flight emergencies that forced emergency ejections. He knew the risk better than any pilot in the formation. When ground control repeated the intercept order, he did not hesitate. He did not question the call. He did not ask for a different jet or a different assignment. He adjusted his oxygen mask, recalibrated his targeting radar with one quick twist of the dials, and held his climb. The wind screamed against the jet's thin fuselage. The engine vibration hummed up through his seat, the familiar thrum he had learned to read like a second language. He knew the odds were stacked against him before he ever saw the enemy. He kept going anyway. Varthaman closed the distance at full throttle, the sky blurring past his canopy as he closed to visual range. The enemy formation split apart, veering off in different directions to avoid a head-on intercept. One jet held its course. It peeled off from the main group, rolled hard to the right, and turned straight toward Varthaman. He adjusted his grip on the control stick, tracked the jet across his windscreen, and recognized the shape immediately. It was an F-16 Fighting Falcon, one of the most capable fourth-generation fighters ever built. Pakistan had imported dozens of the jets, upgraded with the latest avionics and beyond visual range missiles. The F-16 outmatched Varthaman's MiG in every measurable category. It could outclimb him. It could outturn him. It could lock onto him before his own old radar could even pick up the F-16's signature. It carried longer-range missiles, more accurate targeting, and a radar that could track multiple targets at once while Varthaman could only track one. The gap between the two jets was wider than the distance between the line of control and Varthaman's current position. Common sense was clear. He could break off. He could turn back, rejoin the rest of the Indian patrol, and let the faster, more modern jets handle the intercept. No one would blame him. No one could question his courage. He still had time to disengage. He could live to fight another day. Varthaman did not turn. He did not break off. He adjusted his targeting reticle, centered the F-16 inches the crosshairs, and held his course. He closed the distance. He chose to fight. Varthaman's old radar painted the F-16 dead on. The targeting computer beeped a sharp, steady tone, confirming lock. He did not wait. He did not hesitate. He squeezed the trigger on his control stick and fired his only R-73 heat-seeking missile. The missile dropped clear of the MiG's underwing, ignited its rocket motor, and streaked straight for the F-16 before the Pakistani pilot could even complete his own lock. Varthaman watched it close the gap in 3 heartbeats. He saw a flash of bright orange blossom where the F-16 had been a second earlier. The enemy jet broke apart in midair. Varthaman did not have time to confirm the kill. The F-16's AMRAAM missile was already in the air, launched in the split second before the jet was hit. It slammed into the MiG's left engine just above the wing root. The explosion ripped through the fuselage. Shrapnel tore through Varthaman's control lines. The jet shuddered violently, rolled inverted, and pitched straight for the ground. It plunged 30,000 feet in less than a minute. G-force pressed Varthaman against his harness, his vision narrowing at the edges as he fought to pull the nose up. He pulled the control stick all the way back to his chest. The hydraulics went dead. The controls did not respond. The ground rushed up faster every second. He held the ejection handle for half a beat, waiting, hoping for a miracle that would let him bring the jet back to Indian territory. The altimeter unwound. 10,000 feet. 9,000. Batsan. He knew the ground would be seconds away when the needle passed 7,000. He pulled the handle. The canopy blew off. The rocket motor fired, yanking him clear of the tumbling wreck. He felt a hard jolt as his parachute opened, snapping him upright in the harness. The wind pulled at his boots. He caught his breath, looked down, and scanned the terrain below. He recognized the ridge lines, the curve of the river. He had drifted 7 miles west of the line of control. He was going to land in Pakistani territory. Varthaman gripped the parachute cords as he descended, steering toward a stand of trees to break his fall. He pulled his survival packet from his vest as he dropped, activated his emergency beacon to alert Indian command of his position, and checked his equipment. He had a compact pistol, a working radio, and a cyanide capsule to avoid capture. By the time his boots touched soft grass, he had already torn his classified flight notes into tiny pieces and crushed his radio under his boot heel. The fragments scattered across the dirt, unreadable to anyone who found them. He had not finished when he heard voices shouting through the trees. A group of local villagers had spotted his white parachute against the green canopy, and they converged on his position within 3 minutes. They surrounded him in a loose circle, cutting off every escape route. Varthaman drew his pistol and fired a single warning shot into the air. He was outnumbered more than 20 to 1. He was alone, hundreds of meters inside enemy territory, with no backup coming. He did not run. He stepped back until his shoulder pressed against a rough stone wall, held his pistol steady, and stood his ground. The crowd surged forward. One man knocked the pistol from his hand with a thrown stone. Hands grabbed at his arms and shoulders. They pulled him away from the wall and began to beat him. Pakistani soldiers arrived in a pickup truck 6 minutes later, pushing through the crowd and pulling Varthaman away before the violence turned deadly. The aftermath of the engagement dissolved into a war of words, played out across global media. Pakistan immediately denied any aircraft had been lost in the clash. It insisted only Varthaman's MiG had been downed, with no Pakistani casualties. India stood by its original claim. Varthaman had shot down the F-16 he engaged before his own jet was hit. For weeks, military analysts across the world wrote off the claim as Indian propaganda. They pointed to the lopsided advantage of the F-16 over the obsolete MiG, calling the kill impossible. Even independent observers sided with Pakistan. The story hung in limbo. with no physical proof to settle the debate. Then, in mid-March, a small local photographer made a hike into the hills on the Indian side of the line of control. He was tracking bird migration when he stumbled across a chunk of twisted metal half buried in pine needles. He pulled it free, brushed off the dirt, and saw stenciled markings on the side. It was a nozzle from an AMRAAM air-to-air missile. The nozzle carried a clear Pakistani military serial number, matching the batch issued exclusively to Pakistani F-16 squadrons. The photographer took a clear photograph of the part and posted it online. Within hours, the image spread across every major military forum and news outlet in the world. Independent defense analysts began their own open-source analysis. They cross-checked the serial number against known Pakistani weapon stocks. They verified the location of the discovery. It was more than 2 kilometers inside Indian-controlled Kashmir. The confirmation of Varthaman's victory left both nations holding their breath. Tensions spiked to levels not seen in a generation. The two nuclear-armed neighbors stood just one misstep away from open war. Both sides already had ground troops mobilized along the border. Artillery units were positioned and ready to fire. Any wrong move could have turned a border skirmish into a catastrophic conflict. After 60 hours of holding Varthaman in captivity, Pakistan made the choice to step back. The decision was framed as a deliberate gesture of de-escalation, a calculated move to pull the region back from the brink of war. It came after quiet diplomatic pressure from multiple global powers who feared the crisis would spin out of control. On the morning of the 1st of March 2019, Varthaman was driven to the Wagah border crossing, the only official land border between India and Pakistan. He stepped out of the Pakistani vehicle and walked across the white painted line that divides the two countries. He was back on Indian soil. Within minutes, Indian military personnel escorted him away from the crossing to a waiting medical team for a routine checkup. News of his release spread across India in hours. Thousands of people poured out onto the roads leading from the border to the nearest military base. They lined every inch of the route, holding flags and cheering his name. They waited for hours just to catch a glimpse of the bus carrying him back to safety. The welcome he received was unlike any given to a soldier in modern Indian history. The government promoted him immediately for his conduct under pressure. He was awarded the Veer Chakra, India's second highest medal for gallantry in combat, for his actions over Kashmir. What had started as a routine combat sortie had turned an ordinary wing commander into one of the most recognized and celebrated men in the country. Today, nearly 5 years after that fateful sortie, Abhinandan Varthaman still serves in the Indian Air Force. He now flies more advanced aircraft, fitting for a pilot who proved his skill and nerve against overwhelming odds. But the story of that February afternoon has not faded. It remains far more than a tale of one man's courage under enemy fire. It is a sharp, unflinching reminder of how fragile the balance of power sits between nuclear-armed adversaries. The entire crisis turned on a series of split-second decisions, each one made by a single man in a cockpit. Varthaman chose to engage an F-16 inches an obsolete jet when common sense told him to retreat. He chose to stay with his spiraling plane for 23,000 feet before ejecting, an act that almost certainly saved his life. He chose to destroy his classified equipment before capture, and he chose to stay calm and disciplined when his captors put him on camera. Every one of those small, individual choices changed the course of the entire crisis. The difference between a border skirmish and a full-scale war between two nuclear powers can be measured in the seconds it takes a missile to fly 10 miles. Most people today assume modern air combat is decided entirely by technology, by stealth coatings and active radars and satellite surveillance and drone strikes. Varthaman's story tells a different, far more timeless truth. That 60-year-old MiG, outgunned and outclassed in every technical category, defeated one of the most capable modern fighters in the world. Technology matters, equipment matters, but pilot skill, aggression, and courage matter more.